The Curse That Mates Us, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. The Mating Ceremony. They made her stand at the edge of the stone ring like she didn't belong there, like someone had dragged a kitchen servant into a royal banquet by mistake. Amelia kept her hands knotted in front of her, head bowed, eyes fixed on the frost-laced ground beneath her bare feet. Even the wind didn't seem to touch her where she stood. It pressed against the velvet robes of the high-ranked she-wolves, tugged the silver-trimmed cloaks of the noble males, but passed her by as if it didn't see her. The grand moon ritual was never meant for Omegas. They weren't summoned to the mountaintop, they weren't chosen by fate, and yet the priestess had called her name. Clearly, without hesitation. Amelia Vale, you are the mate of Alpha King Axel Thorn. The silence that followed stretched too long. It didn't feel like awe. It felt like disbelief, the kind that turned cold and sharp. She had heard someone laugh behind a fur-draped hand. Another whisper. She must have misheard. But no correction came. The priestess, eyes pale and blind with the touch of prophecy, had turned toward the platform where the Alpha King stood cloaked in black. He hadn't moved, not even a twitch. Amelia hadn't looked up yet. She didn't want to. She already felt it. The collective judgment of the gathered elite packs weighing down on her shoulders, pressing her lower, making her feel small in the bones. Her stomach was hollow. Her chest ached like something old had cracked open inside her. There was no fluttering hope, no girlish dream unfurling, only a trembling sense that something unnatural had just happened. Then footsteps. Hard ones. Measured. Each one louder than the last until they stopped a breath in front of her. He smelled like snow and earth and cold steel. His presence was heavy, not just in height or strength, but in gravity. It dragged everything inward, made the space around her fold in. She lifted her chin. Axel Thorn looked exactly like a king should. Tall, broad, severe. His jaw was clean-shaven, expression unreadable, eyes the color of a glacial lake before a storm. They passed over her like she was fog. His mouth didn't move. Then finally a voice low, unshaken. I reject this bond. No pause. No hesitation. Not even a blink. The priestess flinched. A murmur swept through the crowd like wind brushing dead leaves. Amelia just stood there. Cold suddenly pressing through her skin like it wanted to crawl inside her bones. Her ears rang, but the words echoed again anyway. I reject this bond. Axel turned his back. Walked away, nothing more, not a glance, not a word. She didn't remember running. She only remembered the way her legs moved before she told them to, the scrape of stone against her soles, the blur of startled gasps behind her. She didn't stop until the trees swallowed her whole. The forest wasn't quiet, it breathed. Branches creaked above her like bones shifting in sleep. Wind whispered secrets in languages she didn't understand. Somewhere far behind, the distant howl of the ceremony's end rose through the air, long and cold and unfeeling. She had run until her lungs hurt. Then she kept walking. She didn't want to cry. Didn't trust what would happen if she let it out. The mark began to burn that night. It was just beneath the skin on the back of her neck, a place that had never tingled, never mattered before. But now it pulsed like a second heartbeat, quiet and relentless. At first she thought it was shame, embarrassment, some psychosomatic thing born from the humiliation of being thrown away like a joke. But it didn't go away. It grew warmer, sharper, like a brand just beneath the flesh. She curled up inside the hollow of a twisted old tree and pressed her hands to it. But the heat didn't come from the outside. It came from within. Her fingers trembled. She pressed harder. And then the dream came. She was back at the stone ring, only this time there were no other wolves, no priestess, no moon. Just him, standing across from her, eyes not cold but burning, bright gold, rimmed with black, glowing like a fire inside something ancient. He wasn't speaking, but his voice moved inside her skull like thunder through fog. You are mine, She woke with her fingers still clenched at the mark. Far away back in Eldara, Axel stood alone on the balcony outside the war room, a goblet untouched beside him, breath misting in the cold air. He hadn't shifted, not since the ceremony. Cain paced just beneath the surface, restless and angry. "You made a mistake." The voice was rougher now, harder to suppress. "She was ours." "No," Axel said aloud, "she would have died. She still might." His hands curled over the railing. The frost bit into his skin, but he didn't feel it. "She left," he said quietly. "We rejected her, and we still marked her." Axel didn't respond, because he'd felt it too, when her scent vanished from the mountain, when the connection didn't snap, when something old stirred in his chest that wasn't fear or desire or guilt, but something harder to name. He'd thought rejection would sever the thread, but Cain had moved on instinct before he could stop it. And now? Now she was gone, and the mark still burned faintly beneath his skin, as if she had taken something with her. Cain growled again, "Bring her back. She's safer out there." "You believe that? Or do you just need her far enough away to forget?" He didn't answer, because forgetting wasn't working, and Cain, for the first time in years, wasn't going back to sleep. Chapter 2. The mark beneath her skin. The wind had changed. Amelia noticed it before the sky did. It no longer howled through the trees like it had the night before. Now it hissed low through the frost-heavy pines, curling around her ankles, slipping beneath her collar as if trying to taste her. Snow had fallen softly in the early morning, leaving a thin, crystalline layer over the moss and bark, untouched, except for a set of human footprints, her own. She hadn't slept since the first dream, and she couldn't. Each time she closed her eyes, that same glowing stare found her. Not Axel's eyes. Not the cold, unfeeling green that had dismissed her without hesitation. But the other ones. The golden ones. They pulsed behind her eyelids, staring without blinking, as though waiting for her to speak a name she didn't know. The ache at the base of her neck had worsened. No longer a dull, distracting warmth, it now burned in waves, sharp and hungry, like something beneath her skin wanted to claw its way out. She'd unbraided her hair to feel it better. The skin wasn't bruised or broken, but there was something invisible there, a thrum beneath the surface. It made her limbs heavy. Her breath caught more often. Her fingers twitched at her sides without cause. Myra hadn't noticed at first. They'd hidden in an abandoned trapper's den a few miles beyond the last Eldaran watchtower, deep in no man's land where the pack's reach thinned. Myra had lit a fire from brittle branches and buried her face in her hands, whispering prayers to the moon like it could rewind time. Amelia had just sat in silence, hands in her lap, the skin on her neck burning. 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 By morning, Myra had grown pale. Her eyes flicked to Amelia's neck often. She didn't ask, but her gaze said enough. Omegas weren't supposed to carry marks, not without mating, not without permission, and certainly not after rejection. Amelia hadn't known what to say. She still didn't. There were no answers to give, only sensations to describe. And how could she begin to explain what it felt like to carry a bond that shouldn't exist? The fire had long since burned out. Smoke drifted weakly toward the broken rafters. Myra had fallen into a thin, dreamless sleep on a pile of old cloaks, but Amelia remained upright, legs curled beneath her, spine stiff, eyes tracking shadows along the cabin's walls. The world outside was beginning to glow gray-blue with the coming dawn. Her breath fogged, then a sound, not outside, inside, a whisper. Low. Ancient. Not in words, but something just beneath them, like a voice filtered through a dream. She sat upright. The sensation sharpened. Her vision swam. Her heart pounded once, then again, slower, heavier, echoing behind her ribs. The room tilted. Her fingers curled around the edge of the wooden bench, but the pressure didn't ground her. And then she felt it. A presence not her own, not Myra's. Naira. The name wasn't spoken, but it bloomed fully formed inside her like breath hitting snow, a word she'd never learned but had always known. The wolf was waking. Amelia didn't shift, not fully. That would have taken more strength than she had, but the sensation of another mind beneath her own was undeniable now. Soft, quiet, watching. Her body stilled. "Why are you here?" she asked silently, unsure if she was thinking or speaking aloud. But something inside answered, not in language, but in warmth, in sorrow, in shared confusion. The wolf didn't know either. Only that something had been taken from them, and something else left behind in its place. Axel hadn't slept either. The northern tower's windows were all glass, the old kind, rippled and faintly tinted, distorting the view of the snow-covered courtyard below. He stood facing it, long after the sun had risen, eyes unfocused, Cain pacing like a caged beast behind his ribs. He'd hoped time would dull the link. That distance would thin the bond until it unraveled on its own. But each hour made it worse. His skin itched, his breath shortened, his control slipped. He could feel her still, the pulse of her heartbeat echoing faintly beneath his own, out of sync, struggling. It shouldn't be possible. The rejection had been formal, final. He'd spoken the words. The ceremony had acknowledged it. But Cain had known better. The wolf hadn't waited. Had marked her on instinct. Had done what instinct demanded before the man could decide otherwise. Now the bond twisted through him like a thread spun from silver wire. Delicate but sharp, cutting deeper the more he tried to ignore it. "We must find her," Cain said again, voice rougher than before. "She weakens. She chose to leave. She didn't choose to burn." Axel's hands curled into fists. The council would ask questions if he left again so soon. His advisors would call him reckless. But none of that mattered if she... He exhaled once sharply. Cain pressed forward, a presence like heat behind his eyes. "She doesn't know what she carries. She doesn't know she is mine. If she dies, we both do." Axel didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Amelia stood barefoot in the snow. The cold should have bitten her skin, but she barely felt it anymore. Her senses buzzed too loudly. The wind moved differently now, as if tracking her. Trees tilted subtly toward her path. The world felt tilted. Not broken, but warped. Something had changed inside her. She didn't know if it was the mark or the wolf or something else entirely, but each hour brought more clarity and more weight. She wasn't fading. She was becoming. Mara stirred inside the cabin, calling her name groggily, but Amelia didn't move. She couldn't. Because across the snow, carried low and soft on the breeze, something new had just reached her. Not a sound, not a scent, a presence, old, vast, watching, and it was coming closer. She turned slowly, hair drifting over her shoulder like pale smoke, eyes wide and bright. Somewhere behind her sternum, Naira stirred, and the mark burned like fire laced with gold. Chapter 3. A Wolf Without Chains. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing Eldara's mountain passes in a silence that felt almost deliberate. The wind moved in long, rhythmic breaths through the firs, stirring only when it carried a scent that wasn't its own. The land seemed to hold its breath as though waiting for something to break. Inside the northern keep, torches burned low, the scent of smoke and pine resin lingering beneath the stone arches. Axel stood in the war courtyard, bare-chested despite the cold, his body slick with the sheen of half-frozen sweat. His fists were wrapped in blood-stained linen from the morning's training. Split knuckles, torn skin. The guards had long since fled the grounds after he'd shattered a column mid-sparring. But he'd stayed. He always stayed. Cain's restlessness would not be soothed with meditation or logic. The wolf wanted violence, or her scent anything less was starvation. For the last 2 days the voice had clawed louder in his head. Not words at first. Just hunger. The kind that could hollow a man from the inside out. But now Cain spoke clearly, and each syllable came with an echo that rattled Axel's bones. "You marked her." Axel's jaw tightened. He hadn't intended to. The ceremony had been chaos, instinct, overriding reason, in the smallest, most fatal heartbeat. His wolf had done what instinct demanded. claimed her in ways no rejection could undo. He tilted his head back, closing his eyes against the snowflakes melting on his lashes. The air was thick with the scent of iron and storm. "She's gone," he said, voice rough, more exhale than speech. "Gone, but not gone from us." A muscle in his cheek jumped. "If I find her, she dies. You know what happens when I know the curse," a Cain interrupted, voice rumbling low through him. "But I know something else now. I felt it when she ran. The mark didn't burn like the others. It healed." Axel's eyes opened, slow and cold. "Healed?" The wolf's tone darkened, a growl tangled in thought. "The bond is not killing her. It is changing. That shouldn't be possible. Unless she... Don't. Unless she's the one meant to break it." The thought cut through Axel like a blade. His breath clouded in the freezing air, shallow and quick. The idea was impossible. The curse had been sealed long before his birth, before his father's, before the bloodlines of Eldara had even learned to control the shift. No one could unravel it. It was punishment etched in divine ash. Yet the wolf sounded certain. And Cain was never certain of anything without reason. The snow thickened, muting the world. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled for the evening watch. Axel turned toward the gates, unable to shake the sensation that her heartbeat was pulsing faintly in the back of his mind, like a signal too distant to catch clearly. "You feel it too," Cain whispered. "She's out there." Axel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was already moving, and Amelia had stopped pretending she could rest. Her body pulsed in uneven waves of heat and cold, the mark searing beneath her skin as though something inside it was alive and shifting. Each breath drew the air sharper into her lungs. Each sound came clearer, colors brighter, senses split open. Myra had tried to convince her to travel at sunrise, but Amelia hadn't waited. The forest no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a corridor, each path narrowing toward something unseen. The deeper she walked, the louder the whispering in her blood became. At times, it wasn't even hers. Fragments of thoughts. A voice, brushing the edge of hearing. It wasn't human, and though she didn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. Possessive. Certain. Mine. The first time she'd heard it, she'd turned sharply, certain she'd find Axel there behind her, eyes hard, ready to drag her back. But there was only silence. Only the trees. Only the faint scent of winter roses. The kind that grew in the royal gardens. Now she felt it even when she tried to forget. Her wolf had grown restless, pacing within her like a heartbeat that didn't match her own. Nyra didn't speak often, but when she did, it was soft, reverent, laced with unease. "He searches for us." Amelia stopped walking. The wind carried the sound of running water, a stream ahead, faint under the snow. She whispered back in thought, uncertain whether Nyra could truly hear her. "How do you know?" "Because the air changes when he moves, because he is the storm that made us." Amelia closed her eyes. She didn't know if it was true, but it felt true. Her pulse aligned to a rhythm that wasn't her own. She wanted to deny it, to call it imagination, to name it anything except what it was. A bond, refusing to die. Her fingers brushed the back of her neck. The skin there shimmered faintly under the moonlight, pale veins of gold flickering just beneath the surface. The glow pulsed once, then faded. Her throat tightened. She sank to her knees beside the stream, palms sinking into the icy water. The cold bit sharply this time, grounding her, reminding her she still belonged to the world of the living. A reflection trembled in the surface, a woman she barely recognized. Hair undone, eyes too bright, skin dusted with frost. "He will come," Nyra murmured, low as breath. "I don't want him to." But it wasn't true. The words tasted like ash. The hunt began at twilight. Axel rode north with only Soren and 2 of the king's scouts. He hadn't told them the reason, only that there had been movement near the borders, rumors of rogue wolves drifting into forbidden ground. They didn't question him. No one questioned their king. The world narrowed to scent and instinct. The closer he drew to the border, the stronger it became. That pulse, that whisper of her skin in his mind. He could feel Cain stir each time her presence brushed against the edge of his awareness. Closer, the wolf said. Axel's throat worked against the cold. You said she was safer far away. I said she was safer alive. There's a difference. The horses slowed near the shadowed ridge that overlooked the river bend. Beyond it, the forest spread like black silk across the land. Moonlight spilled through the trees, turning the snow to shards of white fire. He dismounted, motioned the others to stay behind. His boots sank into the snow, the sound barely audible. The air shifted again, warmer now, threaded with something fragile. Not scent, not sound. Memory. He stopped breathing for half a second. There, faint but unmistakable. She was near. Cain's presence surged forward, pressing against his control. Axel's fingers flexed at his sides, his pulse steady only by force of will. The wolf wanted to run, to tear, to claim. But Axel anchored himself with the memory of her face under the ritual moonlight, the shock, the pain, the way her lips had parted as if she'd been struck. He couldn't afford that look again, not unless he understood what she had become. The forest watched him as he moved forward. Snow gave way beneath his weight without a sound. His shadow followed longer than it should have. Then, between the trees, he saw it. A flicker of movement by the river. Pale hair catching light, the faint gleam of skin. She was kneeling, head bowed, one hand still in the water. For a moment he did nothing, just watched. The pull inside him tightened until his chest ached. The wolf pressed closer, trembling with restraint. Touch her. He didn't. Couldn't. Instead he whispered under his breath, a confession carried away by wind and snow. I tried to save you. Amelia's head turned sharply as if she'd heard him. Her eyes searched the darkness. For a heartbeat, the bond between them thrummed. Alive, electric, dangerous. Then the wind shifted. Her scent reached him fully for the first time since the ceremony, and Cain, unleashed at last, rose like a storm beneath his skin. Chapter 4. Her wolf wakes. The wind had a strange rhythm that night, a low hum that rose and fell as if the forest itself were breathing beside her. It no longer sounded wild or distant. It sounded alive, conscious, aware. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a mist that clung to the trees and curled around Amelia's ankles as she moved through the dark. Each step felt uncertain, though she no longer knew whether it was because of the cold or the weight of what followed her. The presence had not left. She could still feel it brushing at the edge of her senses, a pulse beneath her skin that was not her own heartbeat. Somewhere far behind her, something large moved through the snow. Quiet, deliberate, not hunting, but circling. She didn't look back. Looking would make it real. Instead, she kept walking toward the faint flicker of light ahead. The old cabin, where Myra waited, unaware that the world had shifted while she slept. Her body felt fevered despite the winter air. Every breath steamed from her mouth, thick and uneven. The burn at the back of her neck had deepened, sinking into her spine, sending soft waves of heat through her chest and into her hands. When she touched the trees as she passed, frost melted beneath her fingers. By the time she reached the cabin, her legs trembled with exhaustion. The faint orange glow of Mara's rekindled fire shimmered through the cracks in the wooden walls, a weak promise of warmth. Amelia pushed the door open, careful not to startle her. The hinges sighed in protest. Myra sat upright beside the hearth, wrapped in an old fur, her eyes wide and sleepless. You were gone too long, she said softly. Amelia nodded, lowering herself to the ground near the fire. I couldn't sleep. The silence that followed was heavy. Myra studied her, gaze flicking to the faint shimmer beneath Amelia's collar. The mark's glow was no longer hidden. It pulsed like a heartbeat under her skin, faint veins of gold spreading outward. You need to hide that, Mara murmured, voice tight with worry. If someone sees, they'll know I was claimed. Amelia finished for her, staring into the fire. Even though I wasn't. She said it flatly, but something in the air shifted at the words. A faint, unseen tremor that rippled through the floorboards. The flames danced higher for an instant, then steadied. Mara didn't notice, but Amelia did. She always felt the small changes now, like the world around her had become more fragile and easily stirred. They didn't speak again for a long while. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Mayra drifted into shallow sleep against the wall, her breathing slow. Amelia remained awake, tracing the grain of the wooden floor with her gaze, following the lines that twisted like rivers frozen mid-flow. Her body was restless, her thoughts scattered. Somewhere deep inside her, Naira stirred again. The wolf's voice was still faint, like a memory that didn't belong to her, but it came clearer now, threaded with a strange calm. He's near. Amelia's pulse jumped. She didn't ask how she knew. The truth had already settled in her bones. The air itself seemed to tense, carrying the scent of pine, storm, and something darker that she could never quite name. It wasn't the scent of danger. It was the scent of belonging, one her instincts didn't know how to reject. She stood slowly, careful not to wake Mara, and moved toward the window. The forest stretched before her, moonlight silvering the branches. Nothing moved. No sound broke the stillness. But she knew. Every nerve in her body knew. She whispered into the night, her breath clouding the glass. Why are you following me? The wind didn't answer, but the mark on her neck pulsed once. Hot, sharp, then steady. The faintest echo of a growl brushed her mind. You are not safe. It wasn't her own thought. The voice was deeper, older, threaded with the command of something vast. It wasn't Cain, not fully, but something of him. She could feel its echo resonate inside her, a tether stretching across distance and fear. Her breath came slow. Then stop chasing me. No response. Only the pulse. She closed her eyes, pressing her palms against the glass until the cold steadied her again. Beneath her skin, Naira shifted restlessly. The wolf's consciousness brushed against hers, gentle but insistent. He doesn't know yet. Know what? Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. That you are the end of it. The words slid through her like silk, heavy and cold. She didn't understand, not truly, but they struck something deep within her, a recognition she couldn't place. For a moment she saw flashes that weren't her memories. Silver chains, moonlight reflected on water, a man's hand drenched in shadow, a mark burning against his chest. Then it was gone. She stumbled back from the window, clutching the edge of the table to steady herself. The vision had been brief but vivid, leaving her skin damp with sweat despite the chill. The door creaked. She froze. The latch hadn't moved, but the air thickened as though someone stood on the other side. Her heartbeat faltered. Mayra stirred faintly in her sleep, unaware. Amelia's gaze flicked toward the shadows near the threshold. Snow dust drifted in beneath the door. Then a shape shifted beyond it. Tall, still, powerful enough that the faint light seemed to bend around it. Her throat tightened. The handle turned, slow, deliberate, but did not open fully. Just enough for air to move through, carrying that scent again. Frost and forest and something that felt like home and fear in the same breath. Her fingers trembled where they gripped the table. She wanted to move, to reach for Mayra, to run, but her body refused to obey. The mark burned under her collar, gold bleeding through the fabric like liquid light. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the air shifted again and the pressure lifted. The door stilled. He had not entered, but he had come close enough to touch her if he wished. Amelia sank slowly to the floor, pressing her forehead against her knees. The cabin seemed to exhale around her, boards creaking softly as if in relief. Yet the scent remained, faint, lingering, impossibly intimate. He was gone, and yet she could still feel him, a shadow stretched across the bond neither of them had meant to create. Naira's voice rose again, no louder than a breath. He cannot stay away. Neither can we. Amelia didn't answer. Her heart beat too unevenly, her body trembling with something she couldn't name. The snow began to fall again outside, thin and silent, covering the tracks that led to her door. Somewhere far beyond the forest, the moon shifted from silver to gold, and inside her chest her wolf opened its eyes fully for the first time. Chapter 5. The Hollow King. The high temple of Eldara sat etched into the mountain's edge like a wound in the rock, a place untouched by weather or time. Snow did not cling to its stones. Wind never howled through its narrow halls. It was said that the moon's favor had once protected the temple, but those who had walked its corridors in recent decades knew better. It wasn't protection that kept the elements at bay. It was something older, something that remembered what had been sealed there. Axel had never entered its inner sanctum without dread. Even as king, he was made to kneel outside the final archway, palms pressed to the ice-smoothed floor while the priestess determined whether the old blood would recognize him. Tonight there was no ceremony, no guards. He entered alone, his boots echoing through the long stone corridor with the sound of inevitability. The torchlight flickered in low, shivering flames, unable to hold shape in the cold. His breath fogged the air, but he didn't slow his steps. Each corner of the temple was carved with the marks of their kind, ancient symbols predating the first pacts. Wolves with burning eyes, fangs bared at the sky, their bodies twisted in agony and worship. He didn't look at them as he passed. He already knew what they meant. Suffering, sacrifice, secrets. She was waiting for him. Always was. High Priestess Elira sat coiled in the circle of ash and salt that had not been broken in 30 years. Her hair hung in silver cords over her shoulders, eyes clouded and unfocused. But she was not blind. Her sight came from elsewhere. And when she tilted her head toward him, he felt it like a hook beneath his ribs. "You've come late, Alpha," she said. Her voice was dry as parchment, her breath scented faintly of dried herbs and something metallic beneath. "I don't require a ritual," he said, "just answers." Elira smiled, but it was not a kindness. "You've never come seeking answers. Only permission to ignore them." He remained standing at the edge of the circle, the heat of the markings on his skin rising again, his jaw tight. "The bond should have died when I spoke the rejection. And yet it didn't." She looked toward the wall where nothing moved, the silence stretched. Axel let it hang there for a beat too long before asking, "What do you know of a mate who lives after rejection?" Elira's head tilted. Her long fingers dipped into the bowl of powdered bone beside her, trailing patterns into the ash. "I know it's not supposed to happen. I also know there are always exceptions, rare, fated, dangerous." His hands curled at his sides. The scent of Amelia had clung to him even after he'd left the forest, pale and quiet like crushed violets and frost. It hadn't faded even now, even with miles between them. "And if she survives," he asked slowly, "what happens to me?" "You've felt it already," Elira murmured. "The hollowing, the space between yourself and the wolf widening, your instincts decaying into obsession. You're already unraveling." Cain growled low in his mind, a sound of warning, of protest. "She was never meant to leave," the priestess went on, smoothing the ash across the floor as if brushing away time. "The wolf chose her. Not your mind, not your logic. And she accepted it, even if she didn't understand what she was accepting." Axel's breath caught for a moment. He hadn't dared name it. That quiet moment in the cave when she hadn't run, when she'd watched him through the trees and hadn't screamed. There had been something in her gaze that night. Not affection, not trust, but a recognition. "She's marked," he said flatly. "Yes," Elira whispered, "and the mark is not killing her." That was what disturbed him most. The curse should have begun consuming her days ago. Every wolf who had ever tried to claim their mate had lost them within hours of the bond being sealed. The mark had always led to death. But Amelia lived. Her scent had deepened, changed. Her wolf had surfaced. She walked the forest with Naira beneath her skin like a shadow coming into focus. "Why?" he asked. "What's different?" Elira's smile returned, slower this time. "Perhaps it's not her that is different. Perhaps it's you." He said nothing. "She may be what the curse has been waiting for," Elira said, dipping her finger into the powdered bone again. "The final thread needed to unmake it." "That's not possible." "Is it not?" Her head lifted slightly, eyes still vacant but alert. "You've spent your entire life believing you were cursed to destroy. What if you were cursed to wait?" The words hit him harder than he expected. Cain went silent for the first time in days, as though listening. "You said there have been no survivors," Axel said after a long silence. "None who were chosen," she corrected. "All who were taken. All who resisted the bond. But she didn't resist, did she?" He thought of her eyes the night she'd turned to face him by the stream. She had not flinched. "No," he said quietly. "She didn't." Elira smoothed her hand over the markings one final time. "Then the curse has changed, or it is ending." Axel stepped back from the circle, his heart beating steadily beneath his ribs, no longer frantic but heavy with something more dangerous. "Hope." "She will not wait forever," Elira said without looking at him. "You rejected her. You'll have to earn her return." He turned without another word. The cold did not follow him this time. Far beyond the temple, Amelia sat at the mouth of the cabin, her arms wrapped around her knees, her breath visible in the night. Naira had fallen asleep again, too drained to argue. The fire crackled behind her, but Amelia couldn't bear the heat. Her skin ran too warm now. The cold steadied her. Naira lay just beneath her consciousness, still and awake, eyes open in the dark. They didn't speak. Not exactly. But Amelia felt the calm that had settled over the wolf. The silence of something patient. The bond no longer ached. It pulsed in rhythm now, low and constant, like the hum of an unseen tide. She didn't know what it meant, she only knew she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the mark, and not of whatever came next. Chapter 6. The Hunt Begins. The sky had turned to slate. Low clouds dragged across the horizon like bruises, dimming the light until it looked less like daybreak and more like the quiet before a storm. In the distance, wind stirred the pines in slow, sweeping waves, and snow fell again, not in soft flurries, but in sharp, angled gusts that scoured the ridgelines and buried the tracks beneath it. The scouts had warned of worsening weather, but Axel didn't slow. He rode at the front, his wolf pacing just beneath the surface, not in a frenzy now, but in purpose. The days of distraction were over. The ache of distance had turned into a direction, and Cain moved with it. Something old had clicked into place between them, the alpha and the beast. A knowing, a certainty. She was alive, and she was waiting for him, even if she didn't know it. They had crossed the old eastern perimeter by dusk, past the last watchtower, and into the forest beyond the pack's reach. The trees grew closer here. The ground sloped unevenly, broken by stones and roots that tore through the snow like bones trying to claw their way back to the surface. No other wolves patrolled these woods. No one would dare. Axel dismounted at the first creek crossing. The others stayed behind as they had been ordered. He needed no eyes but his own. Her scent was still faint, but constant. It threaded through the trees like a forgotten melody, too subtle for anyone who hadn't bled with the bond. He pressed a hand against the bark of a frostbitten pine. The mark on his palm tingled again, low and steady. Cain's presence pulsed with it. "She moves ahead of us," the wolf murmured. Axel nodded, though he hadn't heard a sound. His fingers curled against the bark. He could feel the warmth rising in him again, not heat from exertion or adrenaline, but the unnatural pull of connection, a thread drawing him forward. It tugged not at his mind but something deeper, something built into the shape of his bones. The curse had never done this before. It had only consumed, decayed, broken. But this was different. The path narrowed the deeper he walked. Light slipped through the canopy and fractured shafts, illuminating only moments of the world at a time. Time passed strangely here. Hours felt like minutes, and still her scent grew stronger. Then he found the tracks of small footprints, bare, unrushed. She hadn't been running. Snow clung to the edges of the trail, but the middle had melted in places as though her skin had carried too much heat for the cold to hold. Axel crouched low, brushing his fingers against the impression of her heel. Warm. He rose slowly, his breath visible in the air, eyes scanning the silence ahead. The trees opened into a small clearing. A cabin stood in the center, low to the ground, its roof sagging beneath the weight of fresh snow. Smoke curled faintly from a crooked chimney, disappearing almost instantly into the sky. He didn't move forward yet, and she was inside. He felt it like a shift in the pressure around him, like the moment the wind stops before a wave breaks. His pulse deepened, and Cain stirred again, not in demand, but in anticipation. "Touch her," the wolf breathed. "End the distance." Axel remained still. He could hear the faint sound of her movement beyond the cabin walls. Not walking. Breathing. That quiet, steady rhythm that had haunted his dreams since the night of the rejection. It hadn't faded with time. It had only grown more distinct. He stepped forward, the snow crunching underfoot with the soft, deliberate cadence of a predator. Not to frighten, not to conquer, but because silence no longer served either of them. The door creaked as he touched it, not enough to open, just enough to announce, and he waited. Inside there was no panic, no rustle of flight, only that stillness again. Then the soft scrape of wood shifting. Footsteps moved toward the door, but it wasn't she who opened it. It was another wolf, a young woman with anxious eyes and trembling fingers. The scent marked her as pack, but distantly so. She froze when she saw him, her breath catching in her throat. Axel said nothing. She backed away slowly, leaving the door ajar behind her, disappearing into another room without a word. The fire crackled in the hearth behind her, casting flickering light against the wooden walls. Amelia stood at the far end of the room. Her hair hung loose, silver-blonde strands falling over her shoulders in waves. She wore no coat, no boots. Just a long wool tunic belted at the waist, sleeves rolled to her forearms. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, too warm for the cold air, too steady for the storm outside. Her eyes met his, and did not look away. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence between them held its own weight. The last time they'd shared breath, he'd turned away from her beneath the full moon, called fate a lie, and left her standing alone in front of the court. Now she stood before him with her wolf fully awake. She had changed. Her scent was richer now, no longer delicate but layered with something wild and unnamed. Her body stood still, but not tense, not afraid. She had expected him, and still she did not speak. Axel crossed the threshold slowly. The heat of the fire touched his skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat that pulsed between them. Each step toward her was an undoing, of pride, of certainty, of the wall he had built between instinct and reason. Cain surged in his chest, not wild, not desperate, just present, alive. He stopped a few paces from her, close enough to see the shimmer of gold beneath her collarbone, the faint line of the mark that refused to fade. It pulsed in rhythm with his own. Amelia's lips parted, not to speak but to breathe, as though taking in his scent for the first time in full. Her fingers curled loosely at her sides, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. Axel lowered his voice, more breath than sound. "I told myself I came to end the bond." Amelia's expression didn't change. "I lied." The words hovered between them, weightless and irreversible. She still didn't speak, but her mark flared. And for the first time since the curse began, the king took one slow step closer, and the silence between them broke, not with words, but with understanding. She had not run, she had waited, and she would listen. Chapter 7. Snow and silence. The storm came slowly, as if reluctant to interrupt. Wind whispered along the outer walls of the cabin, trailing around the crooked shutters and through the gaps in the eaves with a sound like breath drawn through teeth. Snow drifted sideways now, not in a violent flurry but in relentless sweeping currents that thickened by the hour, piling against the door until the outside world disappeared beneath white. Axel had not left. He stood near the hearth, not seated, not relaxed, his body still coiled beneath layers of command and restraint. His coat hung from a nail by the door, dark with melted snow, boots muddy from the trail. The scent of him filled the room now, earth and steel and something more elusive, something heavy, like the moment before lightning strikes. Amelia had not moved either. She sat beside the low table, her hands wrapped around a chipped clay cup of steeped pine tea, though the heat had long since faded. Her body was still, but not calm. Her heartbeat had changed since he entered, deepened in her chest, every pulse echoing down into her fingertips. She hadn't known how much of herself had attuned to him until he was near again. Now every breath he took resounded through her in ways she couldn't unfeel. Mara had retreated to the back room long ago, making excuses she didn't need to explain. Her eyes had flicked between them once, sharp, uncertain, and then she had vanished without a word. Amelia had barely noticed. The silence had grown thick between them, not awkward, not hostile, just full, tense with everything that had not been said and the weight of all that could not be undone. Amelia's voice broke first, though she hadn't intended to speak. "You shouldn't be here." Axel's gaze moved to her, not sharply but slowly, as though his attention was a deliberate gift. "No," he said, "but I am." She lowered the cup. The tea was bitter now, the herbs oversteeped and cooling. She placed it gently on the table and drew her knees closer to her chest. "You rejected me." "I did," and her chest tightened. "In front of everyone." "Yes. No apology, no excuse, only fact, stated like stone." She turned her face toward the fire. It had burned low, but the embers still glowed. The light touched her skin in waves, rising and falling with each flicker. "Then why follow me?" The silence stretched again, but not far. He moved. Not close, but closer. Enough that she could hear the subtle shift of his boots on wood, the faint rustle of his coat hanging beside the door as the wind caught the edges. When he stopped, she didn't look up. She felt him in her skin before she saw him. "I thought the curse would kill you." The words landed differently than she expected. There was no softness in them, no remorse to comfort or console, but there was truth, clean and cold and unmistakable. She turned to face him then, slowly. His expression hadn't changed since the moment he stepped into the cabin. Still unreadable, still bound tight in a composure that looked effortless, but had taken years to sharpen. But something beneath the surface had shifted. His eyes no longer held only caution. They held recognition. She studied him for a moment longer, then reached up, her fingers brushing the skin beneath her collar. The mark throbbed faintly beneath her touch, pulsing like a second heartbeat. "Then why am I still breathing?" His jaw tightened, his gaze dropped to her fingers. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but you are." "And that bothers you?" "No." A pause. "It changes everything." The wind clawed against the windows again, louder now, demanding entry. The fire guttered briefly, and the temperature in the room dropped. Axel turned toward it and knelt, feeding the flames from a stack of pine logs beside the hearth. The dry wood caught quickly. Sparks danced upward into the chimney, chasing the cold into the flue. The light shifted again, and in it Amelia could see more of him. The scar along his left shoulder, half hidden by the collar of his shirt, the faint bruising around his knuckles. He hadn't come easily. and he hadn't come without cost. "You came to end the bond," she said softly. "I did. But you didn't." "No." Her breath shook slightly. Not from fear. From something she couldn't name. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her. But the way his body settled, low, grounded between her and the door, was a kind of claiming, not of dominance, not of demand, just presence, as though the room was no longer his to command, but hers to allow. She shifted slightly, pulling the wool blanket higher around her shoulders. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow stacked against the cabin walls with muffled thuds, thick enough now to silence the woods. No animals, no wind through trees, only the sound of fire crackling and breath. Axel didn't speak again. He leaned one forearm against his knee, gaze fixed on the flames, and waited. Not for her words, not for permission, for time. Later, minutes or maybe hours, Amelia opened her eyes. She hadn't meant to close them, but the heat had lulled her and the silence had become something deeper, more anchoring than sleep. Her body remained tense, spine still straight. But her mind had softened at the edges. The room had dimmed again. The storm had not stopped, but it had steadied into something rhythmic. She glanced toward the hearth. Axel had not moved. He sat exactly where he had been, his eyes no longer open but not fully closed either, as if caught between awareness and memory. The fire cast shadows across his face, hard planes, high cheekbones, mouth drawn in a line that looked too tired for a man who was feared more than loved. For a moment she let herself look at him. Not the Alpha, not the King, just him. And she felt the mark pulse again beneath her skin. Not with pain, but with awareness, with understanding. She didn't touch it this time, she simply breathed and let the silence stretch unbroken between them, because there was nothing left to say, and for once, that felt enough. Chapter 8. Truth beneath the mark. The storm had passed by morning, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the snowfall. The snowdrifts outside the cabin reached the windowsills, sculpted smooth by wind, sealing them inside with a hush that pressed against every surface. The air held a stillness so complete it felt unnatural, like the forest itself was waiting. Amelia stood alone at the back of the cabin, her hand pressed to the frost-laced window pane. The glass was clouded, cold enough to sting her skin. She didn't flinch. Her breath fogged the surface with every exhale, a slow rhythm in the silence. Behind her, Axel slept, if it could be called sleep. He had leaned against the wall near the hearth hours ago, arms crossed, chin lowered, eyes closed, but never fully surrendered to rest. Even in sleep, he remained a presence that dominated the room. His stillness was not peace. It was control. Absolute, measured control. Amelia didn't trust the silence, not after everything it had held. She turned from the window and walked to the basin. The water had frozen over in the night. A thin skin of ice stretched across the surface. She broke it with a fingertip. The cold shot through her hand like a warning, but she washed her face anyway, letting the sharpness ground her. The mark on her neck had changed again. She'd felt it hours before she dared to touch it, a slow, burning pressure that had spread through her chest like a heartbeat out of sync. When she ran her fingers along the skin now, it was warm, not fevered, not inflamed. Just warm, as if it no longer existed beneath her flesh, but had become part of her. She hadn't spoken to Axel since the night before. Neither had he. But the space between them had changed, no longer strained or heavy with the absence of words, but something else. A current, a pull. The bond they had tried to deny no longer slept beneath the surface. It breathed with them. When she finally turned to face him, she found his eyes open, gaze fixed not on her, but on the fire. "You haven't asked," he said, voice low from disuse. She didn't need to ask. The answer had been written across his face since the moment he stepped through the cabin door. "You didn't come to unmark me." "No." The word came easily now. "Honest." "Then why?" she asked, folding her arms around herself, the blanket she'd worn slipping from her shoulders. Her skin prickled, not from cold, but from something more instinctive. Axel looked at her fully then, and the weight of that gaze landed between her ribs. His expression didn't change, but his silence stretched long enough to mean something. "I wanted to understand," he said, "why it hasn't killed you." Amelia held his stare, unmoving. "You thought it would." "I knew it would." His voice didn't waver, but it wasn't cruel. It was something more fragile, more dangerous, a confession made of stone. Amelia stepped closer, though she didn't remember deciding to. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers curling slightly. "But it didn't." "No," he said quietly. "It didn't." The fire popped between them, sending a spark curling into the hearth. The light caught in his eyes, green, but not cold. Not anymore. She stopped an arm's length from him, searching his face for something she couldn't name. "You didn't just come for answers." His jaw shifted, a faint movement. "No." She waited. "I came because the bond didn't break," he said, "and I couldn't stop feeling it. I thought if I stayed away, it would fade, but it got louder, stronger, like something calling me back through my own bones." Amelia swallowed. "You marked me before you rejected me." He nodded. "Cain did." Her breath stilled. "Why?" "He recognized you before I did." That answer sank into her like the slow spread of heat. She felt Naira stir within her, not startled, not upset, simply awake. "Did you come to claim me?" she asked, her voice thinner than she intended. Axel's expression darkened, not in cruelty but in something close to restraint. "I came to warn you that the bond would get worse, that the wolf wouldn't stop." He hesitated. "That I couldn't stop." "And now?" His gaze didn't shift. "Now I think you're the reason the curse is breaking." The words fell into the room like a stone into water, rippling outward in silence. Amelia blinked once, slowly. "You think I'm the cure?" "I think you're the difference." She turned away, walking back toward the table, though her limbs felt slow, as if the space between them had grown dense. She pressed her hands flat against the worn wood. The grain of it was rough beneath her palms, grounding. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I didn't ask to be marked. I didn't ask to be cursed." He said it without bitterness, but not without weight. She looked back at him. "And now we're bound by things neither of us chose." Axel stood, the motion smooth and unhurried. Not a threat, not a warning. Just gravity moving through muscle. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, "by rejecting you." Amelia let the truth sit between them. "You hurt me," she said, and it wasn't an accusation, just truth. "I know." He didn't try to take it back. He didn't step closer. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, as if offering nothing but presence. The silence that followed was not empty. She crossed to him before her mind fully caught up, driven by something deeper than certainty. Her fingers found the edge of his shirt, brushing the fabric. The heat from his skin rose through it. When she looked up, his face was unreadable again, but his breath had hitched just slightly. She placed her palm flat over his chest, above the place where she imagined the mark had once burned. She couldn't see it, but she felt it. His voice was low, roughened at the edges. "You should send me away." "I should." Her fingers curled slightly. "But I won't." The fire crackled behind them. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Inside, they stood still. And between them, the bond hummed, no longer unraveling, no longer breaking, but coiling tighter, pulling them into something neither of them fully understood. Not yet, but soon. Chapter 9. The mating bite. The cabin was too quiet, not in the way that followed storms, not the hush of snowdrifts piled high against the eaves. This silence was heavier, dense and unspoken, stretching between two bodies like the final inhale before something ancient returned to the surface. Amelia's hand still rested against Axel's chest, and she hadn't moved. Neither had he. The fire at their backs hissed as it consumed the last of the pine wood, sending thin smoke curling toward the rafters. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering patterns that shifted with every breath. Her palm rose and fell with the slow, measured beat of his heart. They had said everything necessary, and now there was only this quiet tension, not broken by words, but shaped by what had lived beneath them all along. The mark on her neck had begun to burn again, not with pain but with heat, the kind that felt like waking. Every inch of her skin felt drawn toward him, as if her body had been built to recognize his. She wasn't afraid anymore. Her wolf had gone still inside her, not dormant but surrendered. Naira watched, without warning, without hesitation, as though waiting for something long promised to finally unfold. Axel's hand rose slowly. He didn't touch her, not yet. His fingers hovered above her shoulder, tracing the air beside her collarbone, caught between restraint and need. When his skin finally made contact, it was with the back of his knuckles, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was brief, controlled, but it was enough. Something shifted and her breath stilled. Heat surged beneath her skin, coiling low and deep. His wolf surged in response. Cain, never far, rising inside him like a tide breaking through stone. For once Axel didn't force him down. He let the sensation rise. It flooded through his limbs, filled his lungs, deepened the color in his eyes until the green shimmered gold. He took her wrist gently, not possessive, not demanding. Just contact. Just closeness. He brought her hand from his chest to his mouth, holding it between them as if it were something fragile. When he kissed the inside of her palm, it wasn't soft, it was reverent. Her knees nearly buckled. Amelia had thought herself prepared for this moment, had believed that time and silence had dulled the edge of wanting. But she was wrong. The bond hadn't dulled. It had sharpened in their distance. It had steeped in restraint, in confusion, in denial. And now, faced with nothing but truth, it flared through her with a force that stole her breath. The mark between them pulsed once and then again, then deeper. He moved toward her slowly, testing the distance, eyes never leaving hers. When their bodies met, it wasn't with urgency. It was with inevitability. Her head tilted back as his mouth brushed the curve of her jaw, his breath hot and slow against her skin. Every inch of contact lit something inside her. She felt herself melt against him, her fingers knotting into his shirt as her own restraint fractured. The bond rose like wildfire. Her lips parted, but not for words. Words had long since failed them. There was only sensation now. Heat and scent and the dizzying pull of the mate call burning through their veins. His mouth hovered above her throat and he didn't bite, not yet. He held himself there motionless, his body coiled like a bow pulled taut. Amelia's pulse pounded. She felt it in her throat, felt his breath sink with hers. Then she whispered so quietly, it barely moved the air. I choose this. A tremor passed through him. Something inside Cain uncoiled. And then he bit. The mating mark struck with the force of a vow, teeth breaking skin, not in violence, but in permanence. It wasn't pain that lanced through her. It was clarity. Her body arched into his, heat surging through her like a river breaking its banks. Her wolf rose at once, fierce and luminous, howling beneath her skin as the bond sealed. Naira didn't speak. She sang. Axel held her through it, his mouth sealed over the wound, not in cruelty but in communion. He didn't let her fall. When her knees gave out, he followed her to the floor, his arms wrapped around her back, cradling her against him as the burn of the curse reached its final peak, and shattered. There was no sound as it broke, no light, only breath. Only the stillness that followed pain's departure. A silence not of absence, but of fulfillment. When Axel pulled back, his mouth red with her blood, his eyes were golden and clear. No shadow behind them, no beast at war beneath the surface. Cain had gone quiet, not dead, not subdued, but peaceful, sated. The curse was gone. Amelia lay against him, her body boneless but not weak. Her breath came in long, even waves, her skin aglow with a warmth that didn't belong to firelight. She felt whole. He touched her face with the back of his hand, brushing sweat from her brow. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glassy, her pulse still pounding through the bond that now thrummed between them like blood in the veins. This was not survival, this was completion. Outside, the wind had stilled entirely. Snow drifted softly again, slow and harmless, settling over the forest like a final blessing. Inside, two wolves lay tangled in the space where a curse had lived. And all that remained was silence. Chapter 10. The Curse That Mates Us. The sun rose without fanfare, pale and golden through the lacework of branches outside the cabin. It touched the snow first, casting the drifts in a quiet amber light, softening the edges that the night had carved sharp. Frost glittered along the windowsills, delicate as breath. The forest held its silence, but no longer out of dread. The weight that had hung over it for generations, the curse that had stalked every alpha born under the Thorn name, had lifted. Inside, the fire had gone out. Only a faint warmth lingered in the hearth, and yet the air in the cabin didn't feel cold. It was as if the place itself had taken a breath during the night and hadn't exhaled yet, caught in a moment it knew not to disturb. Amelia lay tangled in the wool blanket, curled against the steady heat of Axel's body. Her head rested just below his collarbone, the sound of his heart a slow, grounding rhythm beneath her ear. She hadn't spoken in hours, not since the mark had sealed, not since the bond had taken root fully and cleanly between them, unpoisoned, unbroken, eternal. Her body ached, but not from pain, from the intensity of the shift, from the magnitude of becoming. Naira had gone silent, not gone, but settled, her presence no longer restless, no longer pacing. They had come into alignment now. Amelia and the wolf, the human and the instinct, no longer two halves, but one complete thing. Axel hadn't moved, save to gather her closer when her body had trembled in the dark. He hadn't spoken either. He hadn't needed to. Every breath he drew carried her with it now. Every beat of his heart belonged to the bond. Outside the window, the snow had begun to melt in small rivulets, dark trails of water etching themselves into the drifts. Spring was weeks away, but something had shifted in the land, as though the forest could feel that the deathless weight had finally fallen away. The wind that moved through the pines had softened. Amelia stirred, not fully waking, but enough to shift her arm across Axel's chest, her fingers resting lightly over the skin just above his heart. She felt the faint echo of the bond pulse between them, stronger now, warmer. No longer a line of pain, but of promise. She opened her eyes slowly. The cabin was cast in soft gold. She blinked once, twice, then tilted her chin upward. Axel's eyes were already open. He was watching her. She hadn't grown used to the way he looked at her now. Not with hunger, not with desperation, but with something steadier, more dangerous, as if she were no longer a mystery he needed to solve, but a truth he would spend his life protecting. She pressed her palm against his chest, her thumb brushing the faint mark there, the mirrored bond, sealed during the night, identical to hers, glowing just beneath the skin like a buried flame. "It's quiet," she said, voice rough with sleep. He nodded. "It's gone." He didn't answer with words. His hand moved to the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the skin above the mark, slow and reverent. The touch was gentle, but there was nothing uncertain about it. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask if she regretted it. He knew, just as she did. Her voice broke the quiet again, softer this time. "What happens now?" Axel didn't look away. His gaze held hers, steady and grounded, even as it flickered faintly gold beneath the green. "You're mine." It wasn't a claim. It was a truth spoken like breath. "And you're mine," she said, her words steadier now, anchored in something she hadn't known she'd longed for until it was real. There were no titles left between them, no king, no Omega, no walls built from bloodlines or ranks. The rejection that had once shattered her had become something else entirely. A moment that had been broken to make way for something stronger. The curse had ended not in a ritual, not in sacrifice, but in choice. Theirs. They lay there for a long time in the quiet that followed. No pack waiting, no court demanding. Just the two of them beneath the bones of an old cabin that had held them through the worst night of their lives. When Amelia rose, the blanket slipped down her shoulders. Axel's eyes followed her, not with the gaze of a man claiming power, but of a wolf recognizing its other half. She stepped to the window and looked out at the forest, the trees dusted in sunlight, the air alive with promise. Somewhere out there the world would keep turning. Packs would whisper. Eldara would stir. And the story of the Alpha King who cursed every mate would become legend. But here, now in this cabin lost to snow and silence, there was only truth. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin against her shoulder. She leaned into him without thought, without fear. The bond pulsed between them again, whole. He whispered into her skin, voice low and unguarded. "You were never the curse." Amelia turned her face toward his, her lips brushing against his cheek. "No," she murmured. "I was the cure." Outside, a wolf howled once in the distance, deep, wild, unchained. And for the first time in his life, Axel Thorne smiled without restraint.